Man, I lost my voice 2.5 weeks ago, and it'll be more clear that I sound terrible if I use a better mic. So
Well, blame it on the mic.
I'm just going to stick with the boom on the Bluetooth.
You sound like a rough and tumble outdoorsman. So I think it's perfect.
All right. Well, that's close enough. A recovering rough and tumble outdoorsman, maybe.
There you go. All right, let's do it. What's up, UX fam? How's your mom and them? Welcome to another episode of Beyond UX Design. I'm Jeremy. If you're new here, welcome to the show. I am super stoked to have you. And if you haven't done it already, please consider subscribing to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you are a regular here and you feel like you're getting something out of the show, then I would really appreciate you leaving a 5-star review. That'll help me out so much. This week's audiobook recommendation is Continuous Discovery Habits: Discover Products That Create Customer Value and Business Value by Teresa Torres. This book was actually recommended to me by my amazing wife, Amy, who also happens to be a product manager. Continuous Discovery Habits is a guide written for product teams, but I think it's also a great book for UX designers to read too. It talks about how to adopt a sustainable approach to continuous discovery. And the book guides you through how to start with a clear outcome, discover opportunities through interviews, and test assumptions to evaluate solutions quickly, all the things UX designers love to do. The book talks about how to use an opportunity solution tree to visualize work, align the team, and engage stakeholders, all while providing evidence-based and actionable exercises that can be put into practice immediately. It's a really great book. I hope you check it out. So head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/audible trial to start your free trial and download Continuous Discovery Habits completely free and help support the show in the process. And as always, thanks so much to Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, and John for all their support. And if you want to join these fine folks and help keep the show independent and ad-free, you can become a patron for as little as $3 a month. And if you do that, you'll get some sweet, sweet perks for your support. And of course, if you think the show is worth sharing, then I would love it if you told some friends. I've got a special guest on the show today. Jon Clancy and I met on LinkedIn. I don't know how I met Jon on LinkedIn, actually. I think there's, I've been doing this thing where I just comment on other people's stuff and I see where people I'm connected with, they comment or they like, and then I follow them. And somehow I found Jon. And Jon is a really interesting guy, and I'm really excited to talk to him. He's actually a career shifter. We're going to talk a little bit about that. But Jon's a senior UX researcher at Cox Automotive today, but he's been just about everything in his career. He's been a lifeguard at Disney World, a raft guide, an EMT, and a massage therapist. In 2018, he started his journey to UX at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill's Information School. He has a master's in human-computer interaction. He started out as a consultant UX researcher at Measuring You and has been in the field for about 3 years now. Jon's from Maine. He's lived in North Carolina for several years, and he now lives just outside of Denver with his wife and his 2 boys, 6 and 3. And they make it a point to explore the mountains wherever they can. So if Jon isn't working, he's probably out hiking. And I'm sure you're out hiking. You're also probably thinking, if I had to guess, Jon. Jon, welcome to Beyond UX Design. I am super stoked to have you on.
Thank you for having me. I'm super stoked to be here.
Absolutely, dude. So you've got a really interesting background, and we talked a little bit, I don't know, what was that, like a month ago? We had a little coffee chat.
Something like that,
And I was just like, you're fascinating. So tell us a little bit about your background and all the outdoor stuff. I love that.
Yeah, so, just to start, I think for a long time, I was of the mindset that I'm going to have my fun now, and that way I don't have to worry about like being adventurous when I retire. I think that was my thinking until the numbers started to add up, but we'll get into that later. But I'm just trying to think of where to even start.
Start at the beginning.
I'm a high school dropout. I dropped out of high school and went to college for a semester. Dropped out of college and went to Walt Disney World and worked as a lifeguard for 2 years. And I think that was a really key moment for a bunch of reasons, because finally I decided I wanted to go back to school, but I actually wanted to at that point. So I went to Hampshire College, which is kind of a no grades, no tests alternative college, which was perfect for me.
Yeah, sounds like a dream come true for me.
You get an assignment and you just decide what part of my interests globally intersect with this assignment. And I'm going to take it in that direction. And it's not like you get failed. Either they really like it, or they at least can check the box that you did it. But to me, that was much more of a training for real life, right? Like as a researcher, when you come to me and say, hey, we have a question, I'm not going to be like, hand me the research plan. I'm gonna be like, let's really deconstruct, like, what are we actually trying to ask, and what's the best way to ask it? And a lot of times, I mean, I'm sure you've seen this, like sometimes you do get handed a semi-baked research plan. And I try to help people understand, like, I'm here and this is my job to plan these things. You can get more value out of me from that. At any rate, that was kind of my undergrad experience. And then I decided to go play. I worked as a raft guide. I worked in wilderness therapy with at-risk youth. I ended up deciding, okay, well, actually, what's more fun is when I got trained as a guide than when I was actually guiding. So that's how I got into wilderness emergency medicine, was basically to train people like, here's how you deal with emergencies in the backcountry, which was great. I mean, it was a super fun job, doesn't pay anything, but really cool. Traveled all over the country. And after about seven years of that, something like that, I realized I have no real community, right? I have friends who live all over the country who don't know each other. So I need to settle somewhere. And for some reason, somewhere in all that, I decided I'm going to become a yoga teacher. I'm going to go to Asheville, North Carolina, and I'm going to become a yoga teacher.
Yoga teacher. All right.
I signed up for a yoga teacher training course, started that, loved it, signed up for the 500-hour, like the full on like yoga teacher 500-hour course, which I took. And as I was doing it, I realized, you know what I really like about yoga? The really therapeutic, like, here's how you can solve your challenges with pain, with mobility, using these sort of flowing, mindful movements, which doesn't sell tickets. If you go work at a yoga studio, they're not looking for therapeutic, personalized yoga plans. They're looking for flow. What do people go to? They go to the Ashtanga classes. They go to the Vinyasa flow, where people, you keep moving, you sweat, you crank up the heat. And those are great. I love those courses, but I don't want to teach them. So somewhere in all that, I realized, okay, that's not my path. It's not. I mean, I'm not going to be a popular, famous yoga teacher. But a lot of yoga teachers I knew were also massage therapists. And so I just started like poking around, and I found a massage therapy school that focused in body alignment, learning all the muscles and how you can treat them, the symptoms that a problem with one dysfunctional muscle will cause, and how to find that muscle, treat that muscle. And just know, like, rub where it hurts is not a good strategy for actual, like, clinical care from a massage therapist. And so I did that. And I ran a business for about 5 years. It was fairly successful. It's just, the upper limit of finances as a massage therapist doesn't really cover the cost of a family anymore. So we had a kid, and my wife kind of looked at me and said, it's time for you to, like, hey, you remember how you didn't save for retirement?
Yeah.
And you remember how you've been playing for the past 20 years? It's time
to adult.
to buckle down and grow up. And somewhere in that, I realized the path to physical therapist, which seemed like the most logical path, wasn't really practical, because I'd have to go back to undergrad for the science, then do the doctoral program.
Completely different, yeah.
Totally different. So somewhere in all this, like, searching for jobs that have a good work-life balance and a decent salary, UX came up. And I read what UX was.
So I'm curious, what led you to that discovery? Was there somebody that you knew that was like, hey, here's this thing? Or did you just totally stumble upon it, Googling things? Or what happened there? I'm fascinated about that.
I came to UX on Google.
Wow, okay.
And I called the School of Information Library Science at Chapel Hill, talked to the admissions person, and was like, this sounds cool. It could be a great, the price wasn't too high because we had in-state tuition. This sounds like it could be a great experience. I went and got a master's degree based on that.
Wow.
And then I got a job, which was its own challenge. And then about 3 or 4 months into the job, people started messaging me on LinkedIn saying, hey, I'd like to learn about UX. Do you have a minute to talk? Can you tell me anything about your job? And that was my big aha moment, that I jumped into this thing with literally nothing but speculation. And these people were responsibly reaching out and asking what the job was. And I was like, what the fuck was I thinking? Tens of thousands in student debt on spec. And luckily for me, it worked out. It was a great fit. And it turns out the way I've been doing jobs for 20 years aligns very closely to user experience design and user research.
Okay. So my next question was going to be, what drew you to UX research specifically over something like UX design? Was it, it doesn't sound like...
I started designing things.
Okay, and they were... I think I saw your cat, Hang had that cat competition or something, and I saw your cat. So there's something like that. Is that what drew you to UX research versus design?
I mean, yeah, kind of. So what you'll see, if you want somebody to truly design an experience, that's where I shine. But as soon as we start pushing pixels, that is not something that is not a skill set that I like. I'm not that detail oriented. I'm much more interested in broader strokes than that. And when I get into the weeds of that, I don't enjoy it, for one, and it doesn't look that good. So, what I design, when I actually do design things, it's much more of a like practical, here's how we get from point A to point B with the fewest steps and the least inconvenience. But if we want to make it look good, let's bring in somebody who's actually good at that. And so what I found is, what I really like about research is I don't have to solve the problem.
Right. You just dig it.
That's not my job.
You uncover the problem.
My job is I learn the problem and then I fight like hell for us to not forget about the problem. To make sure we remember, hey, remember when we talked to all the users and they said, like, I'm sorry, we're not supposed to say users here, right?
Well, yeah, use whatever term they are. It depends. Customers, there you go.
When I talk to the customers, whether it's customers or internal team members, whoever's going to be using our product, when I talk to them and we discovered this was inconvenient, are we addressing this with this design? Because I think we are leaving a piece out, or I think we're missing a piece. And that to me is a great place to be. I really enjoy, like, how can I articulate the problem in such a way that we all start to care about it? Because I didn't know the problem until I started talking to the people that were, that are using the product. And then once I knew the problem, I can see just how inconvenient that makes their day.
You just said something that I just want to throw out there and chew on for a second.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something I've seen with a lot of teams, depending on how, every UX team, every software team is really structured kind of differently. So it all depends on where you work. But I've seen this quite a bit where UX researchers, they go off, they do a thing, they build a deck, they got the deck, they give it to somebody, they do a presentation, and then they leave. And what you just said, though, and that drives me crazy, by the way, when people do that. The difference between like a good UX researcher and just another kind of one with the handoff, we fight to not forget the problem, which means you have to be there the whole time.
Yep.
Right. Yep. And it's not like a handoff. You're not just saying, here's some stuff I found. I hope you guys fix it. You give them this deck. I'm sure you do a deck. I'm sure you do a presentation, but you also make sure you're fighting to not forget it. And also, the UX designers, I think, should also be doing that, the people who are doing the design.
Sure.
But, I think that's really important to think about, fighting to not forget, forget about the problem or forget about the people who have the problem.
Right. And so to me, you said it, I started out as a consulting researcher. And, that's exactly the scenario you described of here's the thing, usability test the thing, do a heuristic evaluation on the thing, hand us back your deliverable, and we'll call you when we have more research.
Right.
And what we would see, and I'm sure you can imagine this because it's not shocking, right? We'd hand them back our findings. And then 8 months from now, they'd have something new, some new iteration on the product that had the exact same problems that we'd already uncovered. And I remember thinking like, well, this is interesting research. I enjoy doing all of this. Like, the nice thing about being a consultant is you do so much research, of so many different types. You get exposed to teams on varying levels of maturity from big tech, which is super UX mature, to, companies that just discovered what UX was and realized they should pay somebody to do it. But I didn't get to stay connected to the journey, right? Like, so I would hand off the research as a one-off that they paid handsomely for. And then hopefully they listen to it, but I have no control over how it's heard aside from a readout,
Now, what's kind of interesting too is, and I feel like both sides suffer here because from my perspective, on the other end, the UX designers doing the pixel pushing, right? Or the visual designers, the UX designers mapping, whatever, they miss out on the opportunity to witness all of those pain points firsthand.
Yeah.
And as UXs, we always talk about how empathy is so important. How do you build empathy when all you have is a PowerPoint deck? Right? It's like impossible.
Well, so we would typically share the assets, and they would get to sit in on the session. So,
okay, so they did that too. Okay,
so it wasn't totally, it wasn't totally removed, but the thing that I found is I usually didn't have access to the designers during that process. They would build the thing and then somebody in product would connect with the team. Maybe the director of UX would come in, but it usually wasn't the people on the ground building the tools. So I didn't understand the questions they had sometimes until we were doing the readout. And to me, that's a miss. That's a huge
It's too
miss.
late, right?
And
Yeah.
and being embedded on a team like this because the advocacy is something that matters to me. And I think if I just was super into being creative in my research strategies, being a consultant is a great place for that. And it was a great place. I mean, it was a great way to build a ton of breadth, across quant and qual strategies. But at the end of the day, building those relationships, understanding what gets heard on a team, and then when I have those findings, making sure that they are heard in, whatever way I can. And part of that is it's not just the deck. Like to me, the deck itself is important because it's a conduit for having the conversation. Although I'm not in love with PowerPoint. I just as soon I keep telling Mural, if they just have a decent presenter mode, I'll just build it there. And
Oh, Miro, dude. You ever use Miro? Miro's got a presentation mode. Oh, it's great.
oh, do they? And I
Yeah.
know Figma does too. We use Mural, so
Oh, right, yeah.
that's where I'm at.
They sound the same, but they're not the same. Yeah.
I know they're not quite the same, but they're so similar. I don't care about the give me whatever tool you want me to present this stuff. What I care about is coming up with a mental model that I can put on a slide that dumbs it down to the point where it's kind of irrefutable. Like this is the problem. It's clear enough to basically be a heuristic that we can test against future designs. Like look at this slide, remember this slide, and test this against what you're building. And if I do it right, I call it the mic drop slide. If I do it right,
like I'm out.
It's the one the last time I built one that was good, I was showing it to one of the stakeholders and I was like, I'm still working on the executive summary. He's like, why?
Perfect. Yeah.
Let's just stay with this. This is the thing that's kind of changed hearts and minds. And he was right. And yeah, that to me, when I get that right, is powerful because it advocates for itself. It's so clear, it's sticky, it's easy to interpret. And a lot of times these problems can be boiled down to something that's that clear. Not sometimes it's more, sometimes it's a total shit show, but most of the time it's just hey, we're missing the mark on this big thing. And if we can hit this mark, then we can figure out what else is wrong because this is what's really stopping people.
Yeah, because part of the thing that's interesting, you mentioned as a UX researcher, your job isn't necessarily to solve problem; it's to uncover the insights and present that to the team, who will then go and solve the problems. And I love that you mentioned in the beginning that you had these teams when you were doing the consulting, at least the teams. Some of them would sit in on some of these sessions and things like that, but you didn't have access to them. And the problem there is that while you're doing the investigation and the uncovering, you have this other group that just kind of sits in randomly, kind of shows up. They're not really a part of the process. And then, there's that disconnect. And it sounds like at Cox, though, you guys are doing it in a different way where there's more collaboration, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And so there's opportunity there for them to also be a part of it. And then you can, I know your job isn't to solve the problems necessarily, but I'm sure you have ideas, and the research team generally has ideas, and it's a great way to bounce ideas off of each other. So I like how you've moved. It's kind of you experienced that one thing, and then you said, this isn't for me. And then you went and found a different team where it sounds like you're happier.
Yeah. I mean, I won't lie. I've loved every moment of being a UX researcher. I think it's a really fun job. I think that, the kind of problems I have to solve are usually very interesting. And when they're not, I can usually figure out something about this that I can make interesting, whether it's, on the back end, how can I build some interesting analysis into this? On the front end, how can I make a survey that's more engaging? Or genuinely, this is just a problem that we need to solve that's really not straightforward, right? If it were straightforward, it's probably not. I don't know, the most straightforward stuff, I'm do we really need UX for this? But research for this? But no, I this is great for me for a lot of reasons, and it's that political component of it that I know not everybody wants, that I really enjoy. Can I help us to to me, I always tell designers I'm working with, think of me as your Wikipedia on this project.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
If I don't have the answer for you right now, I have a whole Rolodex of people, of customers that I can call, of internal team members and stakeholders that I can call to get you that answer. Don't feel like you have to stop what you're doing to go get an answer that that's kind of my job. And then the other part of that is I'm trying to build something that's like ammo for you to be able to build the right solution. Because always the pushback is like, how much can we spend on this, right? How much time, how much effort, what's the level of effort, what's the cost? And to me, a lot of what I'm doing is trying to frame the problems and let somebody else figure out how important the problem is, but be as articulate as I can about it. And like you said, not forget about the problem if we chose not to solve it today.
Instead of saying I'm like your Wikipedia page, you need to start saying I'm your Chat GPT. And that's how you can sell yourself going forward.
I don't think we want that message. I think we want to avoid that.
Instead
message.
of AI, your OI, your organic intelligence, and you're just like, I'm your Jon GPT.
Mhm.
That's how you could say it.
I'm your Jon GPT, yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about your transition a little bit, because there's a lot of people out there that are trying to find jobs in UX or UX research. And I'm curious, getting from your master's degree and then looking for work, what was that like? I mean, did you going to a degree? Because there's also those people out there that are thinking about doing boot camps versus actual degrees, courses, right? At a traditional college. Talk a little bit about that, going from a traditional college with a master's degree and looking for work as a UX researcher. What was that like for you?
Yeah. Okay. So let me add one little wrinkle to this. So I graduated in December of 2019. My youngest son, Linus, was born.
Hold on a second. Your son's Linus?
Yeah.
Mine too.
Sweet.
Yeah, dude. Oh, that's crazy. All right. Anyway, go. Sorry.
Nice.
How old is he? 6 or 7? How old? He's
3.
Okay, so mine's 7. Anyway, sorry.
The oldest is 6, turning 7 in October.
And what is his name?
He's Isaac.
Okay, I have an Arlo, so Linus and Arlo.
Nice,
so,
nice. Arlo
anyway,
was on our list. It was on.
Was it really?
It was.
No, no way. Anyway, I don't want to derail the conversation.
No,
I got a funny
cool.
story. Remind me afterwards.
Okay,
Go ahead.
okay.
Sorry to interrupt.
So Isaac was, or excuse me, Linus was born at the end of January of 2020, and you'll recall that at this point COVID was in the news, and within a month of that, maybe 6 weeks from then, we were on lockdown.
Yeah. Oh,
so
yeah,
that's the landscape of when I graduated. Which is to say, finding a job in UX was not the hardest or the scariest thing that was happening at that moment.
Sure. Yeah, everything's relative, I guess.
Yeah. But I also found a job pre-COVID. And I think that was a different story on many fronts. But, it still was, okay, so when you try to get into UX, and I've talked to probably a couple hundred people at this point who are trying to get into UX at one time or another, there's this challenge of like, how do I get the attention of a company to the point where they even give me a chance? Like, how do you get through the ATSs? How do you get to the recruiters? And I didn't even know that ATS was a thing. I didn't talk to any. I talked to 2 recruiters. We had job fairs at Chapel Hill, which helped a little bit, at least got me some interviews. But the truth of the matter is I was freaking terrified. And I was terrified on the front of like, hey, one kid is pretty expensive. We're about to have 2. Hey, I just took on $40,000 in student debt and I don't have a job, and I didn't manage to get an internship this summer. Did I just screw us over? Like big time?
Yeah.
Did I just screw us over? And I know people go through this. Like especially, the boot camps, the master's programs, you spend that money, you spend that time, and then you are out there. And like Wile E. Coyote, who hasn't looked down yet, hopefully there's still solid ground under your feet, but you're not sure, and you don't really want to look down, and you don't really want it to fall apart. So I applied to probably 200 places.
Wow.
At least I still have the document that has all of my cover letters and all of my slightly tweaked resumes, and all of the job descriptions. And I applied to UX design, UX research, UX strategist, UX, whatever, entry level UX apprentice, whatever I could find. And I got 3 interviews.
So question, you mentioned before UX design was not something you felt like you would excel in necessarily.
Yep.
Were you still kind of looking for anything and you ended up just getting the UX research job and that's kind of what happened? Or how did that, or did you actually pick UX research or was it just sort of luck of the draw?
Let's say I prioritized UX research.
Okay.
But, when I ran out of UX research roles to apply for that I, and still found UX jobs in general, I was definitely still applying. So, but I think it's probably more accurate to say that UX research and I found each other.
Okay.
Like
I love that. Yeah.
That
it was
talking to I think maybe one of those interviews was for a design role, and it was very clear, like, this isn't really what I've been specializing in. I don't have the answers to some of these questions. I don't have, if you want me to build something in Figma, I'll probably pull it off. But if you want it to be something that I can hand off to another researcher and things are labeled right and auto layout is used correctly, and no, I'm not there. But, at the end of the day, I had one application where they gave us homework, and I did the homework. And I did the homework, and for whether that's don't do free work, that was bad or not, it's not like I was doing anything else at the moment. So I did the homework and I went above and beyond. And I figured out how to make whisker plots horizontally in Excel because I thought that was the best way to present the data. And that's not native. Excel is not capable of that horizontally. You have to make bar charts. Like, I don't even remember how to do it. You have to tweak everything to do horizontal whisker plots.
Well, I've been following you on LinkedIn a while, and some of the stuff you're doing with Excel is pretty fascinating. So
thanks.
I'm not surprised you figured that out.
Yeah. So at any rate, I went above and beyond. I did a heuristic evaluation they didn't ask for, but I felt was appropriate.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
And a month and a half later, they called me back and said, hey, why don't you come to Denver and let's see how you do? And so the good news was I had the hard skills to analyze data, and measuring you is very quant heavy. So, and not just to analyze data, but like you said, I'm pretty proficient in Excel to analyze data quickly. And so where most people would come in and do their entire day of mock interview was a lot of time just spent on the computer analyzing data, because that was kind of the deal. It was like, hey, come do a mock work day and tell us if it's something you enjoy. And we'll decide if you're somebody we want to have around, and that was kind of the process. And I think they did a great job of that. So I was done with my work and I got to talk to people, and that was not a typical scenario. So I think that was a big part of it is, okay, you did it quickly, and we got to know you.
So I want to ask you about your degree with the human-computer interaction.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of options for people out there. If they do decide to go to school, human-computer interaction is something you see a lot.
Yep.
But UX design, there's a lot of schools that have UX design specialties and things like that you can get certificates or degrees in. How did you feel about your human-computer interaction degree versus what you've heard about other people having UX degrees and what they might have learned in school? Was there some, can you compare and contrast that, how that might have been different? And maybe follow-up question, do you feel like you didn't learn something in school that you felt like you're missing?
So what I discovered once I was in the job is that maybe the most valuable things that I brought to the table, I'd already learned before I went into my master's program.
Okay.
A lot of the interpersonal stuff, a lot of the leadership stuff, productivity, having an owner mindset, not a technician mindset. These are all things that came from prior careers. How to, convey something clearly as a teacher, that's what you do.
Yeah. How do you become a successful UX researcher if you can't do something like that, right?
I mean, I agree. You can probably be a good quant analyst of data, but if you can't turn that into a story that you can then tell, and that people want to hear and people want to retell and people want you to come retell it, then I feel like your impact is going to be pretty diminished. So a lot of that did not come from my master's program. What I did get from my master's program was a lot of theory, like information theory, understanding the history of human-computer interaction from, well before people were talking about it in tech. And then once they were talking about it in tech, a lot of the theory was in place in the 70s and 80s, and before. And so, just recognizing, okay, we're kind of a derivative field, which isn't a bad thing. A lot of this stuff somebody figured out before they figured out computers.
It's fascinating you mentioned that, because somebody recently posted about Jacob's Law on LinkedIn. And there's a doctor who does a lot of research, and he was like, this isn't new. This is positive learning transfer that Jacob Nielsen renamed after himself. But essentially, this idea of positive learning transfer is an analog thing. It could be me learning how to use a machine with physical buttons and everything else. There's nothing to really do with it could be a loom built, or a factory building machine, in the early 1900s,
Yeah.
where the buttons are placed should be the same on different machines so that I don't accidentally press the wrong button and I don't know, blow the place up or something. So it's kind of fascinating. You mentioned that derivative field. It is but it's all based on a digital version of physical things that humans have been interacting with for hundreds and hundreds of years.
Well, and you probably read about fighter jets in World War II. At some point, they realized, hey, what if we standardize the controls and maybe people will stop crashing for no reason? Just this concept of I don't know. And to me, it's very similar to common ground theory, which is essentially if we don't have an understanding of what we together understand, it's very hard to communicate. So a website that's come up with a new convention for how to do something, it better be really damn clear and worth it.
Yeah.
Or all you're doing is just costing yourself customers.
Or you're creating an art piece, right? Which is essentially not what we're trying to do with this whole debate. Designers aren't artists. So so I love that. So in the HCI and the human computer interaction courses, did you learn a lot of psychology, or did they teach you about, the bias, cognitive biases, things like that? Or is that kind of stuff you just sort of learned on your own?
So it's hard to separate because I also, somewhere in that, somebody said something that made me finally listen to Thinking Fast and Slow, which I had purchased as an audiobook years before. I finally decided to sit down and listen to it. And I was like, this is fascinating. And then, you go from there and read Nudge, and this directly ties into UX.
Sure.
How are we, choice architecture, just understanding how are we supporting people to make decisions they want to make, which is fascinating because I think we think about, if you take people outside of UX and think about choice architecture, kind of assume that the choice architecture that companies are engaging in is about, we want you to do the thing that's best for us, like the deceptive patterns, rather than we want you to do the thing that you would choose to do. But I don't know. At any rate, I was totally hooked. Now, if there's a book about that even touches on behavioral economics, I've probably read it.
It's funny because you mentioned behavioral economics. I was actually, before I started doing UX design, I was going to LSU for economics. And that was the most fascinating thing I think about economics was the macro, the behavioral economics part of it, right?
Yeah.
Once I started doing micro and having to do the, the curves and calculus, that's when I was like, I'm done. I can't do this. I'm out. But, it's funny because I wasn't thinking anything about UX design back then, in 2004, 2003, whenever this was.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I got into UX design that I realized all of those economic principles on behavior and how humans interact with one another and systems in general, it clicked. I was like, wait, hold on.
Yeah.
And that's when you said, again, the derivative field. We've been thinking about this for hundreds and hundreds of years. We're just applying it now to a very specific niche, which is, software design.
Yeah.
And it's kind of just fascinating thinking about all of that and putting it all together. So anyway, I just wanted to point that out. It's just really interesting insight.
Exactly. And so I think I've failed to answer your question. But
I don't even remember what it was.
I've talked to a lot of people who graduated from my program and other programs, and this was my complaint at the end of my program was, I don't know what of what I learned is important for getting on the job and doing the job. And that was, I told the dean, that was part of my exit interview, is this is the one thing that would be really helpful. And I honestly think, in looking back, it also could inform the curriculum. And this is the thing we always discover, right? If we decide to ask the people who use the products, we will learn to make better products. If we just decide to ask them, what was it like, and what are you doing now, and how did you use that? I think there's a lot of things that could be done better. And that's probably true of all programs. And I'm not ditching on UNC at all. I really enjoyed the experience, but I do think if you came into it straight out of undergrad, you might feel like there were some knowledge gaps that you had still at the end of it.
One of my questions that I wanted to ask you actually was looking back on it. You mentioned you didn't really put much thought into this when you just called the local university. But I'm curious. Now I'm kind of jumping around. This is my ADD coming out here, but I'm listening to, people like Darren Hood, and he's really involved in academics and teaching at University of Michigan, I think, or I think Kent State. I don't know. I know he's at several places, but anyway, he talks about how the curriculum should be informed by the actual people doing the work and the things that you would actually do in real life. And that's his big complaint, I think. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but that's one of his big complaints with, something like a boot camp where they're just teaching a bunch of junk. Yeah. And it's not really geared to teach you how to do the work in real life. And, what you're saying there sounds like very similar to one of the things that Darren has sort of pointed out, which is these people are creating these curriculums without really input from the people doing the actual work. I think it's Darren Hood, or it might be somebody else. I can't remember who said that.
He's definitely said it. I'm not. I don't want to put words in his mouth either, but I've definitely heard complaints about the curricula and whether they are actually, one, pedagogically appropriate. Like, are you going to learn the thing? And then two, are they practically applicable? And yeah, I mean, I think they can probably all benefit from that. Maybe some of the older, more established programs, the ones that, really sort of broke the mold, maybe they've already gotten there. I think some of them have. But at the end of the day, what I really needed out of my program to be a researcher, I should say, because I didn't get what I needed to be a designer, because that's like, brain transplant. But what I needed to be a researcher was a clear understanding of academic rigor around research. I think I could have been speculative about like, hey, we could probably figure out this way or that way. But I think taking some time to be in an academic setting and work with other people, think about an IRB, think about, how are we asking questions in a reasonable, appropriate way to gather information that is reliable and falsifiable. Like those things you don't get from, I don't think you can get that from on the job training as a researcher in a lot of places, because one,
because they're not doing it.
I can't promise you mentorship. If you come into UX research, or I think design too, there is no guarantee that where you go, the person who is more senior than you has that. Like they may, and then they very likely do in a lot of places, but there's no guarantee. And so that was probably the biggest value add that I had, is I felt like I came out of it with a good head for how we can ask a question that minimizes bias, minimizes timelines, and actually addresses the question you want to ask, not the one you told me you want to ask, but the one you actually want to ask. And I mean, I don't know, that to me is like priceless. So I have no regrets about going to Chapel Hill. And I think there's a lot of my classmates have also been very successful coming out of the program. So it's a good program. I mean, if people are going there, I can't say anything bad about it, but I would say you still might need some life experience.
So my question is, going back, if you could go back in time, 3 or 4 years, whenever it was you started, 5 years, I guess, what would you do differently finding a school? Would you, maybe you'd end up back at Chapel Hill, but would you ask any different questions, or any advice you could give to people who are looking for either a 4-year degree or a master's degree or something? Any questions or anything you would give yourself some of that advice if you could go back in time?
So one, I would tell them, I'm going to put in a plug for Megan Thomas.
Oh, she's great.
Go listen to Jeremy's podcast with Megan Thomas about doing networking.
Yeah, you're right.
Don't start that after you have paid for the boot camp.
Yeah.
That could very well be a giant waste of your money. Go look for some folks who are in UX, who are doing it, who are pretty open about it. There's a lot of them. Talk to some designers. Well, first, just follow them, interact with their posts, shoot them a message that says, hey, I think you're posting really interesting stuff and I'd like to talk to you about this field, and see if you can get 15 minutes on their calendar. Go to Tony Mora's chit chats, go to Darren Hood's chit chats. Yeah. Listen to Debbie Levitt's open office hours, post some questions, like do those things. Those are free and they're as valuable. If you want to get into the field, they're as valuable as 45 minutes you're going to spend in a boot camp.
And Debbie does a free consultation too. I think 30 minutes.
Awesome.
She'll talk to you one-on-one.
Awesome.
For free.
There you
go. I'm actually interviewing her tomorrow. So
Okay, well, you can double
she's
check
going to be on the
that.
show. Yeah. Now, so it's interesting you mentioned the networking piece. One of the things that, I'm kind of combining two pieces here, but the networking piece is really important to find out that issue you just talked about where will the senior people know anything about this to actually teach me on the job? And, one of the things that Debbie's always talking about is UX research democratization. And the problem there is you've got a lot of people who are doing quote unquote UX research that actually have no idea. And so it's impossible to know that if you don't go and have those conversations before you accept the job offer. So if you feel like that's something that you want to do on the job and learn from actual people who have done it and know it and can actually do the rigor, that's something you can't find out unless you go and do that networking piece and do your due diligence beforehand.
Yeah.
So I just want to tie those two things together because I think, that's really important. If that's something you care about, the only way to find out is to have a conversation with somebody who works there because, or used to work there too.
Yeah,
actually.
for sure. And then I think if you understand what UX is, which I don't know, I feel like there's debates from to me, I felt like I understood 90% of what UX was once I read the definition the first time. Like I was like, oh, this is how you describe the thing I've been trying to do for 10 years, 20 years, whatever. To Nick Fine's you got to be 5 years in before you know what it is. Somewhere on that spectrum is going to be whenever you understand what it is. But I feel like there's some reflection to do around does this resonate with me? To me, it was as soon as I understood it, and I'll share a quick story. I told you I taught wilderness emergency medicine. There is no need for somebody who's getting into that field to be anything more than a technician. You can train as an EMT. You can apprentice the classes, until you're ready to start teaching them. And then they'll give you they'll give you the curriculum. They'll hand you the textbooks and say, go teach at UVM, go teach at, the Boy Scout camp in Atlanta, whatever. But one of the things that I always thought was super important was to iterate, to I would teach a lesson and then I'd think about what did they understand? What didn't they understand? Where did I see drooping eyebrows? Where did I see nodding heads? But then we would teach people how to build splints. And so you think, okay, well, a big part of emergency medicine from the perspective of what are you going to remember from this class is the practical aspect of pull out your backpack and figure out how to splint a broken leg with whatever is in your backpack and whatever you can find in the woods around you right now. And we had these principles. The idea is, and you can look up the wilderness medicine books. It's still in the books. The acronym is Big, Ugly, Fat, Fluffy, BUFF, right? The splint should be Big, Ugly, Fat, Fluffy. And I would teach this. And then I would watch them build big, ugly, fat, fluffy things that were fluffy and did not stabilize a thing. And what I realized after a while is, because I would then go evaluate it, give them feedback, and they would learn how to do it better. But at some point I realized they don't need what they're learning right now. They need what I know. They need that how to evaluate the splint, not how to build it. That's not the right level. Yeah. You need to go one level beyond, and you need the principles to go through and have a checklist of what makes a good splint. And so I started thinking about, well, it needs to be firm. You need to press on it. It needs to feel like a borderline ripe avocado from the outside. It needs to be adjustable because injuries swell. You need to be able to take any knot that you put in there or strap that you put it on to hold it. You need to be able to loosen it or tighten it, depending. Right? You need to do that. They might move and it shifts. Now it needs to be tightened. It needs to be rigid. There needs to be something hard that's holding this thing together. If you're using a blanket and some clothing, you don't have a splint yet. Put a stick on it. Use a sleeping bag, something like that. And it needs to be tight. All of those ties need to be tight enough that it's all held in place. And that gave us the acronym FART.
FART. I was trying to, as you're going through it, I was like, what's the acronym here? FART. That's perfect.
Yep. Firm, adjustable, rigid, tight.
Something you will not forget.
It's sticky. You remember it. But what I realized is as soon as I taught them that, all of a sudden people got smarter. Their splints got better faster, and their splints stayed better for longer throughout the course. And that right there is the sign of somebody who is destined for UX, because that's exactly how I thought about the problem space is well, how do we help these people actually do what they need to do in context, not in my class, and this is teachers understand this concept. I can demo a really bomber, impressive splint that I can build quickly and I can build with almost anything. And if I do that, if I build it quickly and perfectly, the first time they ever see me build a splint, you know what I've accomplished? I've accomplished a group of people saying, wow, Jon knows how to do something cool.
That's it.
And it doesn't feel approachable.
Right, which is not useful for them at all if they actually need a split in the wilderness, right?
The goal of teaching is not to show off. The goal of teaching is to impart. And so you have to slow down. It's okay. Sometimes I would intentionally do something wrong and undo it and fix it because that's real. And sometimes even let them catch me screwing something up. And like that's okay. And to tell them like perfection is absolutely the enemy of what we're trying to do right now. Like we are trying to help a person, like perfection is an ambulance. That to me like is what teaching is, but it's also a really good mindset for UX. To just sort of like think about it not from the experience of like did I check the boxes, but for me, like did I do the things I was supposed to do, but did I check the boxes for them? Did I do the things they need me to do? And like if something like that resonates, like to me, that tells me like you might be a good fit. You might already be a UXer.
I love it.
And now we just need to like show you the like here are the hard skills for your job.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Like you already understand the concept. If you don't understand the concept, I would not recommend a rapid boot camp to get into UX.
So this leads me to something I want to talk about. The last thing I want to talk about.
Okay.
Which is you mentioned something in our last conversation when I said something about I was surprised that you only had a few years of experience in UX because you come across as much more knowledgeable than the number of years would imply, I guess. I don't know how to say that without sounding like I'm speaking down. But anyway, when I listen to you speak and when I read the things you say on LinkedIn, that strikes me as someone with a lot of wisdom. And it's funny because when you specifically said, you're like, well, I only have 3 years of actual experience as a UX researcher, but here's all the other experience I had. And then you said something which is fascinating. I want you to talk a little bit about it. You said you feel like a false senior. So tell me about that. And I want to talk about that. When you say false senior, is that like imposter syndrome, or what do you mean when you say that? And is that something, a lesson you can teach?
I want to clarify, because if I said that, and I try to be really careful around this because I don't feel like a false senior. But I have heard the narrative of the false senior.
Okay. That must have been my misunderstanding.
I heard the narrative of the false senior from the moment I started following people in UX on LinkedIn. There was this notion of like people who have risen to their level of incompetence or above who are carrying a title that was not earned. It was,
I see. Okay.
And I don't know, earned or not earned. I'm not going to get you. People can assess that on their own. But to me, what I believe I said, and then I posted about it a little bit later, and I think may have led to like why we're talking today, was I have been thinking for a long time about writing a post called Confessions of a False Senior. And the thing about it is, I don't believe that years on the job is a good proxy for value. I think that if you get to 15 years on the job, there's certain expectations of understanding that I can more or less take for granted. And I definitely believe there's a point at which I'm saying, okay, you've probably been through the ringer a few times. You know some stuff for sure. But you can be 15 years into a job and not be very good at that job. That is at every job out there. That's true.
Yeah.
So it's a flawed paradigm, at least from that perspective. But the other thing is this is a derivative field. We have people coming into UX. I think I turned 40, 3 months into my first UX gig. So like there's 20 years of something,
Sure. Yeah.
that like is either relevant or it's not. But I think the breadth of UX and the fact that it covers so many different industries certainly suggests to me that it's probably touched on something relevant. Now, whether you were reflective about it, whether you grew from that, I don't know. And I won't speak to that. Like I can't speculate. Knowing that you have a year on the job doesn't tell me anything, is kind of my point. But what did you do before that? How have you approached this? How have you, where is your ego in all this? Do you come in like what you're doing? Because as soon as you come in with the like, I got this, people, you're not open and you're not learning.
No, I had a conversation with somebody on LinkedIn, I don't know, months ago, and this conversation has stuck with me, and I'll probably never forget it. And it was so infuriating. The person said something. We were talking about soft skills, and the person said something like, "Soft skills are meaningless. That will never help you to get a job. What matters is that you can, design an interface or something." And the more I thought about it, I'm like, I think they're sort of half right, but they're the way they thought about it was totally wrong, but they were sort of half right by mistake. And I think it's, the soft skills might not get you the job. You can't get a job as a UX designer with only soft skills.
No.
But you can't excel and exceed and be effective without them. And so
Yeah.
you have to have the soft skills in order to move up. And in your case with 3 years experience, normally with no life experience, I don't think you'd be where you were at with just the education you've had.
No,
right? It's
definitely not.
all the other things that you've done that have allowed you to move up in 3 years, but you're doing it right. You're doing it well. And clearly you can educate, you can teach. That is the job of a senior. It's not just to always do the work. It's to mentor and teach the people beneath them to also be better.
Yeah.
That's part of the job.
And this is something, like, if I can have a soapbox for a minute.
Go ahead. This is your soapbox.
We need to teach juniors. We need to look for juniors and we need to bring them into the fold. And
I agree.
We're doing a crap job of it. And this is how we end up with juniors who think UX UI is the job. Rather than like, hey, you need to step back and think more holistically before you start putting pixels on the screen. Just think for a moment about the story. And what I find, and I've experienced this here in other jobs, like I became a UX researcher, I get the job, I get hired for the job, and it's kind of like stumble your way around until you understand what you're doing and you understand the context. Like, we didn't build a good apprenticeship. We didn't build a good training model, a good onboarding model. If there was a good onboarding, positive, powerful onboarding experience for somebody, it was the dumb luck that you stumbled onto someone who's made that effort. But there is no guarantee anywhere that I've worked, and I maybe that's not true at the most UX mature orgs. I don't know, but some of them I don't want to work for right now. So
yeah.
for
most
other
people
reasons.
Aren't working there. Yeah, exactly.
For other reasons. But these, right now, I tell people who are looking to get into the field, maybe don't look to big tech. Big tech is in some sort of mass hysteria about like who they can afford to keep on board. But the other companies out there are hiring. JPMC is hiring like crazy. There's places that are hiring, but they may not be UX mature. And if they're not UX mature, you might have to fumble around in the dark a little bit.
They're likely not UX. It's probably not just they might not be. It's like they probably aren't.
Exactly. And so what they are likely to do if you let them, and not intentionally, and I don't believe this is hostile, but they're likely to confine you to the world of interface design without the context, the broader context of user experience, the exposure to people who are doing the job, the idea that like, hey, you just started the job. Cox Automotive, we work with car dealerships. Wouldn't it make sense to send somebody to a car dealership and just hang out for a day? Just
and learn whatever. Yeah, learn that job. Like train to do that job, whatever that job is.
Yeah, like we have the relationships, and I know the car dealers will be happy to keep the commission.
Yeah, sure.
So
yeah, let someone else go do something. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but that if you don't understand what UX is more broadly, you wouldn't even think to do that with this person. Like, go understand more than I do about the job, because what I want you to do is solve problems I don't see. And I think that's something that we call ourselves, we are professionals. This is a profession, but this is a profession that evolved organically, right? In doing so, didn't necessarily put the steps in place to bring in new people. So they're like, I see that all the time. Like, we interview somebody who's super interesting. We love them. And then we say, hey, who has the bandwidth to take on a junior? And you just get crickets. Like, there's nobody who's feeling like they're up for that task. And to me, I'm like, that should be one of our goals as an industry, as a profession, is how do we bring people in and make them successful advocates for our field, make them and I say advocates for our field because every time a tool goes out there with a good user experience, it sells people on the importance of user experience.
Yeah, and this is something Don Norman has been, I think this was like years ago now. They did a research study and it was published about education, design education, and comparing how we're teaching people to more traditional fields like law and medicine and all these other things. And they do that. They have a pipeline
You have
of,
to.
you know, internships and you know, residencies and all these other things in order to build that talent pipeline. And UX has never done that.
Yeah.
You know, we always want to hire somebody to do everything, UX, UI, and you can do everything. And I only need one person and they're going to do it all. And, you know, senior this, and that's, you know, we don't need a junior because we want someone to go and do work.
Yeah. We want them to hit the ground running. And like, that's fair. Sometimes you do want to hit the ground running, but once you're running, now we don't need to hire more seniors. We need to hire people who can, like, who maybe don't cost quite as much, but the broader mission to me is, and I've seen it where I am in other orgs, if you have too many seniors, you're going to get people who start to look outside of your organization because they're saying, okay, well, there's 6 seniors here. There aren't 6 lead roles that are opening up anytime soon.
What's next for me?
So how do I get to lead? How do I get to principal from here if this company doesn't have that for me? And I just keep thinking like we need to be bottom heavy. Like let's have a lot of juniors. And sometimes that means it's going to cost more for a hot minute, but I think at the end of the day, we'll be able to do more, but we'll also be teaching people what UX actually is. Not just the juniors who maybe they already get it, maybe they don't, but the product partners, the business leaders, the market researchers who need to understand how we can add value to their job because we don't want their job. You know, but parts of our job sound a little bit like parts of their job.
There's a lot of conflict between product and UX for sure because well, I do research, I do discovery, right? So yeah, that's something that, you know, you don't learn in a boot camp for sure. And I don't think you learn that in the 4-year degree either, to be honest. But, you know, that's kind of something that it's kind of interesting. So last question before we get out of here. Yeah. I want to know, you talked a lot about this and I think you've already answered some of these questions, but maybe you could summarize it again. Sure. What advice would you give yourself or somebody, you know, starting out, looking for school, looking to get into UX, looking to maybe career shift because that you have that experience? What advice would you give them as they start their journey? Research. Do your homework.
Take a pause and map out, how do I understand if this is a career for me? Understand that it is likely to be a little bit painful getting in, you know, because it will be, you know, it was for me, and there's more people on the job market right now than there was when I was looking. Is it where you want to be? And so whatever you have to do to learn what it is we do and whether it's where you want to be, like that to me is like step 1, do that research. And maybe you do it concurrent to applying to grad schools and researching boot camps and doing whatever, you know, sit-ins of classes that you can pull off. But do that broader research of like, what is it like to be in the industry? And maybe, I mean, to me, it's a great job. I love the job. The work-life balance is fantastic. And the nice thing about what I do, you know, at the end of the day, if somebody's feeling burnt out and they reach out to their leadership and say, hey, I'm feeling overworked and exhausted, we you know, we'll say we sell used cars. Take a day.
Yeah, the world's not going to end. Yeah,
like take a day and come back fresh. Like that work-life balance that doesn't exist for a lot of careers in tech. And for what it's worth, if you go into a startup, you might not get that. But broadly speaking, the emergencies that come up in UX can wait till next week if they need to. And
I love it.
I think that's really, really a great thing. But do the research and make sure this is something you want to do, because it's not cheap to get in, and it can be. I mean, I've talked to people who are 2 years into their job hunt still.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I mean, they shouldn't be. That doesn't seem right at all. But it does exist. It is possible. So you're not walking in right now guaranteed employment. So learn everything you can, learn the language, learn the landscape. And I think that you'll walk into interviews seeming like you know a little bit. And that's unfortunately a major commodity at the moment.
Yeah. And that due diligence piece, the research is also important for finding the right company that you want to apply for.
Yep.
So, you know, before you go and get a job, you know, especially as a junior, you're kind of desperate to get a job. You're like, I'll take anything. Sometimes taking anything is not going to help you long term.
Yeah.
You're going to learn the wrong stuff. You're going to learn bad behavior, and you're only going to set yourself back. So, research everything,
Yep.
research schools, research instructors, like
Yep.
Megan mentioned that,
Yeah,
research
absolutely.
instructors at the school just to see, is this the right instructor for me? That, and then the industry you want to be in, the jobs you want, the role you want, because there's
Yeah.
a million roles, and every company kind of treats UX and software differently, right? There's no standard. So
Yeah.
anyway, I love that advice. Research.
Yeah. And stay in touch. Like if you reach out to somebody and you do a one-on-one coffee interview with them, like reach out again, stay in touch, build those like I I always am reluctant to use the term mentor
Yeah.
as like I have people who have mentored me. I'm not sure I've had one person who is a singular,
Just, yeah. Right.
for all cases, a mentor, but build that support network that includes mentorship, that includes, like, honestly, on the job hunt, sometimes you just need to talk to people who are in the field so you feel like you're part of it. Like, stay connected because we're here and frankly, we love to talk shop. And when I get offline and
We do,
yeah,
right? We all love to talk
we
about
do.
our
It's
work and
really
everything
cool.
else.
We're
Yeah.
doing cool stuff. And when I clock out and go hang out with my wife and my 3-year-old and my 6-year-old, they don't want to hear about UX.
Yeah.
So if you want to talk
So
UX,
you got to find somebody to talk to
yeah.
about it.
If LinkedIn shuts down tomorrow, I'm screwed because my wife
Oh,
is going
dude,
to be
I'm
like,
with you, man. My wife's like, get off LinkedIn. I'm like, but I'm having such interesting conversations.
yeah. My wife is going to be like, you need to figure out how to be more interesting to the rest of us.
Is this our clam moment right now, John? This is the clam moment.
But I think we're good. Yeah, but I think that's something that it's easy to get in the hole of like, I'm searching for a job in an industry that may or may not take me. And I think if you sit down and talk to people who are in the field, you're going to discover that whatever hostility you feel like you detected on LinkedIn or Twitter or wherever else you're following UXers that's their public persona. And if you sit down and talk to them, they are not going to be an asshole to you. They're going to be incredibly warm and welcoming. And if you've got some misconception about what UI is relative to UX, they're not going to hang up on you. They're going to chat with you about it.
Right.
It's a really, really warm and fuzzy and friendly field, and so like take advantage of that.
So true, man. I love that. I love that you say that's so true. Yeah. And everybody, I mean, that's something else too. Like when you get a job, very rarely, I've come across them, but very rarely have I found UX designers to not want to collaborate. They all want to collaborate. Everybody loves that's like part of why we got this job. We love collaborating with people. So, use that to your advantage. If you're out there and you're searching, use that to your advantage because people love to talk about their work and what they're doing and the cool stuff they're doing. Just to, like as we talked about in the episode with Megan, approach it in a way where you're putting some critical thought, not just sending 80 questions and expecting them to respond. That's the kind of stuff that you avoid. But
that's what your job is actually going to be like when you get into UX. Like if you don't have that built into your brain of like pause, think, research, and like designers have to do their own kind of research going into a project, right? But like you have to have that kind of mindset when you're doing UX anyway. So apply it to whether you want to get into the field.
All right, John. So I only got you for another like 15 minutes or so. I want to do run through some questions that we like to ask all our guests. But before we do that, anything we didn't get a chance to talk about that you think is worth addressing that junior career shifters or junior UX designers or career shifters should know?
Well, you said we've only got a few minutes. So I feel like to me, there's an entire volume, like series of books to be written. They could benefit people, but at the end of the day, I think it's just go talk to people, see what's being said online, and the haters don't really, they don't hate as much as they sound like they do. If you go to a boot camp, you're not going to be looked down on. Once you're in the field, it's about your contribution. Nobody cares that I have a master's and somebody else has a bachelor's and somebody else has a PhD. It looks good if you're doing a conference talk, but in the Teams meeting or the Zoom meeting, nobody's looking at your credentials. They just want to know what your contribution is today. So it's definitely broader than what what your credentials are. But once you know stuff, they'll appreciate your value for sure.
That's right. I love it. Great advice. All right. So I've got 5 questions here, simple little questions I like to ask all my guests so everybody listening can get to know my guests a little bit better. First up, what is your favorite non-design book?
Yeah, I knew you were going to ask me this.
When we say design here, when I say design, let's say UX research. So non-UX related book.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's fair. I was going fiction anyways, so we're safe.
Yeah, there you go. Perfect.
And it's a hard question because I love stories. My bachelor's degree was in storytelling. I love stories. I think still, well, I think it's shifted. There's a book called Far Tortuga by Peter Matheson. It is one of the most strange books to read because it's not really written in prose.
Okay.
It's and for the first half of the book, you might not be totally sure who's speaking when somebody is speaking, but it's basically this. It's the story of these turtle fishermen at the end of the when that was a thing in the Caribbean, like when they were running out of turtles.
Okay, I didn't even know it was a thing.
Yeah,
to
like
be honest.
that was a thing.
Okay.
They used to sea turtles were. I mean, the cool thing about sea turtles is their meat wouldn't go bad, so they could have a sea turtle and eat it for weeks or months at sea. So it was this really like valuable commodity, and they got overfished, and so it's this story of these people who are part of a dying industry who've heard about this island that's full of turtles, and they're trying to find this island. And you have the crew manifest at the beginning of the book, and as you read it, you get to know the different characters. But the story is really compelling. It's an iconic, like, if you're interested in the tropical world at all, it's very iconic, and you feel immersed in it. And I love Peter Matheson anyways. I think a lot of his books are fantastic. But that's the one that stuck with me the most.
That's cool. I had no idea like turtle hunting was a thing.
It was a thing.
Go look into that. Right on. All right, man. What is your favorite non-UX podcast?
I'm gonna go with This American Life.
Oh, it's good.
I love Ira Glass.
Yeah, he's awesome.
I think they tell stories, and I love stories. They tell stories that I remember, that I get hooked on. And to be honest, it's been a hot minute since I've read anything or listened to anything that wasn't UX related. Because to me, that was the thing for the past 5 years is like learn.
Yeah, man, I feel you.
Like just learn everything I can. And so it's been a hot minute, but I do need to turn that on again because they tell great stories.
I love Ira Glass too because during the pandemic, I saw he was recording in his closet, which I can't remember if I told you, but I'm actually in my closet. This is where I record the podcast.
I kind of
like a tiny little office. Yeah,
from the space you're dealing, but from sound perspective, it makes sense.
Yeah, it sounds great in here. And, I was just like, oh, Ira, I love that, man. That's so cool. His looked way more uncomfortable because it was like one of those sliding door closets where you literally had like six, like, I don't know, 8 inches or something.
That's awesome.
Anyway, I love Ira Glass. This American Life is great. All right, what is your favorite meal? And this could be something you've cooked, something you've eaten somewhere, something your mom or your grandma used to cook.
So I'm gonna caveat this by saying favorite meal has a comfort food vibe to it. Now, the most impressive meal I have ever eaten in my life, and I told you I'm vegan, which does sound like a limiting factor, but my wife is not, and she agreed with this. We went to this restaurant in Denver, and people say there's a foodie scene here. I haven't found it, but there's this restaurant called Somebody People in South Denver, and we showed up right at 5:00 when they opened, which is the only reason they let us in, and we did the prefix menu. It is a vegan restaurant. They make everything's farm to table. Everything's like they figure out the menu when they have the food. And they do these things that you would never expect, like pasta with granola, that like savory granola, that you would just be like, why would you eat that? What the hell is it?
And it's crunchy with the pasta?
There's a little crunch, yeah.
I mean, I guess people put like water chestnuts and
crispy onions.
Noodles. Yeah. Okay.
It was, I kid you not, the most impressive meal I've ever had in my life. It was from soup to nuts. Everything was it wasn't just delicious. It was delicious, but it was fascinating too.
Yeah.
And I am anxious for the day where we find another sitter and we can go back. But
oh my God, I know that struggle, dude. Not living not living near your parents and having free babysitters is rough.
It's rough.
It's very rough.
It is definitely rough.
I'm feeling you, man. My wife and I, we had 2 different date nights. One for my birthday, one for our anniversary.
Nice.
I had to cancel both of them because our babysitter canceled like 1 a.m. the day before.
Oh,
like
dang.
texted like, I'm feeling sick. I'm like, bullshit. She was in high school and I'm pretty sure she was out with her friends and they were like, hey, we got a party tomorrow. And she's like, well, I got to babysit. And they're probably like, just tell him you're sick. I'm fairly confident that's what happened, but I don't know. Maybe not. Not if she's listening, which I doubt she is. I'm sorry if I...
She totally listens to your podcast.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, sure. All right. Last question. Oh, sorry. No, one more question. What's your favorite vacation spot?
Ooh.
I know you're a mountain man, but is that your favorite vacation spot?
I'm kind of, so the thing about me is, and I think this is, my wife and I don't always like, not wired quite the same way, because I'm always like, let's try new things. And so I'm like, I don't usually advocate for going back to the same place. But actually, let me take a step back because let me try this again. So while we live in Colorado and my family is out east, my parents have a cottage on an island off the coast of Maine, and we go there every summer for a week or so. And it's probably not I mean, we live, a stone's throw from a number of national parks. Frankly, I can just drive west from Denver and it's beautiful.
Yeah, you're in the Rockies,
there's
right?
so many places to explore, and that to me is kind of my go-to of like, hey, I'm on vacation, let's go explore. Let's find a national park, let's find a state park, let's find anything that's wild and exciting. But when I bring my kids to see my parents and to see my family, there's a connected feeling that I like, but I think even more than liking it, it means so much to me for my kids to have that connection with my family.
Yeah.
That as much as I like selfishly, I'm like, let's go play in the mountains. I'm like, let's get them connected with our families. Let's figure out how to pull that off, because we're not nearby. They don't see them every week, and they do value it, and they do feel loved by people who aren't just us. And I think that's, you said you got a 7-year-old, right? The pandemic was a shitty time to be that age.
Oh my God, dude.
So
hard. My kids.
Yeah.
Second birthday, I think one of them had a second birthday and it couldn't see grandparents and anything. Oh God, it was so hard.
It was traumatic for my oldest. And I think finding those moments for him means a lot. So, I mean, I'm just going to go with, Peaks Island off the coast of Maine, because that's where I know I can get it for them every year.
Last question. What is your favorite design tool that is not Figma? I guess you, as a UX researcher, you probably don't use Figma much, so maybe that's just a bad question.
Yeah,
maybe I should say, what's your favorite design tool? It's not Excel.
So Figma's cool. It's really impressive, right?
Yeah, it is.
And I feel like they've done a lot of they've really kept building it, which is very cool. From a research perspective, I tend to gravitate towards Excel because it's kind of, you can build your own little program in a box to do whatever you want to do to manipulate data. Manipulate sounds bad. To analyze data, to adjust things. Like the other day, we wrote a script for a 3-day site visit for some research, but then we had to have a 2-day and a 1-day variation. And all I had to do was write 1, 2, 3 next to every line and then just do a filter. And here's my 2-day, here's my 3-day. I just prioritized it by reading the script. And you can't do that in other software. So Excel is awesome. Qualtrics, I don't know what is going on with their user interface. But the surveys that I can build are awesome. And that's the one that I get to use right now. But frankly, any survey tool is great. So, wow, that's a terrible answer though, because I just sort of rambled about a bunch of products.
No, it's perfect. That was the idea. No, that's cool. I love that. Qualtrics. I've never used it. We use we have a proprietary survey tool that GE built, so I have to use that.
Oh yeah.
When you mentioned any survey tool is good, I'm like, well, you haven't seen this.
Well, Measuring You has a. I'm putting a plug for MUIQ. I think it's relatively affordable. It's pretty powerful. The interface is hideous. It really is, but it's so powerful, and you can do anything with it. Like if you don't see how to do it, you can build JavaScript to do it. But it's built on Lime Survey, which I wouldn't be surprised if your proprietary tool is too, because it's open source survey software. But I mean, to me, honestly, one of my favorite things is Google Forms, because Google Forms is one click, you integrate it to a spreadsheet. So I capture the data as you enter it, and I can build the analysis on a different sheet so that as people enter the data, everything I was doing updates, which is so cool. And I don't know a good way to do that with Qualtrics and Excel. If I could do that, that would be a huge win for me.
Yeah, I don't know. Somebody's probably figured it out, but it's probably requires some level of like development or something.
It requires my IT services to give me permission to use that tool, which
right. Well, that's true too.
There's no way
that's also something. Yeah, that's funny because that's something a lot of people don't realize before they get a job, especially like people in boot camps and stuff. They're like, oh, we have to use. If I don't get a job using Figma, I'm not applying for that. They don't use Figma, I'm not going to that company. And I'm like, I mean, like, there's so many places that don't use Figma. Like, yes, it's very popular, but where I work, we can't use it because everything is on someone else's server, and they do not want us to use it because of security issues. You know, so like we can't use it.
It's
you don't want to get a you know. It just seems like such a silly thing to fight over, to die at sword. Is that the sword you want to die on? You know, I don't know, but anyway, there's people out there like that. All right. So that's it for me. Before you get out of here, let us know, where can we find you? Anything you want to plug? Sure. You're doing a lot of cool stuff on LinkedIn, a lot of posts, a lot of really insightful stuff. So why don't you give yourself a little plug?
Yeah, I mean, please reach out on LinkedIn. I love to connect with new and existing researchers. I'm always open to a coffee chat. It might take a couple weeks to book it, but I'm always open to it. I don't have anything that I can monetize out there. So, you know, the good news is I have no agenda. The bad news is I have nothing to sell right now. But yeah, no, definitely follow me on LinkedIn, connect with me. I don't like having followers. It feels culty. Connect with me on LinkedIn, whatever. I'll probably accept it. If you're a bot, I'll be disappointed. But please connect. I rant all the time on LinkedIn. I always max out the character count.
The same way.
I think I have some things to say, and I think we've had a lot of really cool conversations. I definitely learn a lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, you know, I will always, if you reach out to me, I will always, you know, come at it from the perspective that I have something I can learn from you, which I do. But
absolutely. And if you do connect with Jon, make sure you take some advice from Megan and add a little note and explain what it is that you like, you know, and how you want to learn from Jon instead of just a random cold connection. So anyway, Jon, thank you so much for joining today. I really appreciate it. This has been an amazing talk. I think a lot of people are going to learn some really awesome insights from you and some really valuable information. So thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. This has been really fun.
Well, all right, y'all. I think that's it for Jon and me for today. I hope we helped shed a little insight on one man's journey from a previous life into UX, specifically UX research. But I'm curious, have you had a similar transition from something else to UX research? How was it for you? Was it similar to Jon's, or was it totally different? Let us know what you think on LinkedIn, or shoot me an email at hello@beyonduxdesign.com. I'd love to hear from you. And if you like what you heard today, don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would love it if you left a 5-star review. That would help me out way more than you know. And if you know somebody who might find any of this stuff useful, why don't you tell them about it? That'd be fantastic. And if you want to help keep the show independent and ad-free, check out all those Patreon sponsorship packages at beyonduxdesign.com/support. You can join Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, and Jon by supporting the show for as little as $3 a month. And there are some awesome perks like that badass holographic Beyond UX Design sticker. You can get a shout out on the show every week. And there's even a package to meet with me for 30 minutes every month. And head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/audible trial to download Continuous Discovery Habits by Teresa Torres. Sign up for a free 30-day Audible trial. Cancel at any time, and the book is yours to keep forever. And in case you forgot, I've partnered with audible.com. So anytime you sign up for a free trial, you'll help support the show. There's no obligation, and you can cancel at any time, and the audiobook is yours to keep forever. So get a free audiobook on me and help support the show. Remember to sign up for the newsletter and check out all the past episodes along with all the show notes at beyonduxdesign.com. I hope you keep coming back for more great UX tips from Beyond UX Design. And until next time, remember, you're more than a designer because there's more to UX than design. I'll see you around. Take care, y'all.
Now you got me umming. I don't usually do that. So the last time I was on a broadcast was my mom used to run a music, or not a music, like a town festival. It's called the Yarmouth Clam Festival.
Clam Festival.
And it's in Yarmouth, Maine. and some reporter was doing a, whatever, what is it, the man on the street kind of
Yeah.
thing, and just pulled me aside and said, "Hey, you having a good time?" And I was like, "Yeah, my mom runs the show." So she's like, "Have you been here before?" And I was like, "Yeah, my mom runs the show." Like
Lots of times.
and she said, "Have you had any good clams?" And this is where I get in trouble. I'm vegan.
Okay.
And I'm also super transparent and candid. And so I said, "Well, I don't really eat clams," which got me in trouble with my whole family. And then I told my wife, "Okay, I'm going to do this podcast. And, part of this is, stemming from this whole like false senior narrative." And she's like, "How does that help us?" She's like, that's not necessarily good for your career track. I was like, "Oh no, it's the clam moment again."
You know what? I will make sure that we don't release anything that will get your parents to be mad at me.
Don't worry. We're fine. I'm not worried.
That's so funny. This is the clam. Well, I hope this is not another clam moment. I'll do my best. We'll see what we can do.